Friends, before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new audiobook, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you in advance. Beowulf, Saga of Shadows. The wind does not simply blow here, it mourns. It carries the scent of ice from the northern peaks and the salt-rot tang of the sea, weaving them into a bitter tapestry that hangs over the land of the Danes. This is not a place for gentle songs. This is a kingdom of long nights, where the firelight is a desperate, flickering defiance against a darkness that is more than mere absence of sun. It is a living thing. A breathing shadow. And in the great hall of Heorot, the shadow feeds. I have seen it. I have stood in the snow and watched the torches gutter and die behind its massive bone and timber walls. King Hrothgar, old now, his shoulders bent not by years but by a curse he cannot name, built this hall as a testament to his glory. Its gables scraped the sky, its mead benches groaned with the weight of his thanes, and its rafters echoed with the songs of Scops who sang of his victories. They called it Heorot, the heart. And now, a different heart beats within it. A slow, malevolent rhythm that begins each night with the falling of the sun. They call the creature Grendel. A name whispered by mothers to frighten children, a shape muttered by drunkards in their cups. But it is no story. It is flesh, and sinew, and a hatred as old as the fjords. It comes from the mist-veiled moors and the stagnant fens, a descendant of Cain, they say, cursed to walk the borders of man's world, forever enraged by the sound of their joy. When the laughter and song from Heorot reach a fever pitch, the doors, barred by oak and iron, simply splinter. And then the screaming begins. Not the clean scream of battle, but the wet, tearing sound of a harvest being reaped in the dark. 30 men, the strongest of Hrothgar's host, lost in a single night. The stone floor is permanently stained, a map of their despair. The kingdom is bleeding out. Hope is a ghost in this land. But across the whale road, where the sea is a gray, churning beast, a rumor began to stir. It was a whisper on the salt-laden air, a story told by traders with fear-widened eyes. It spoke of a shadow in the north, and of a king who would give a kingdom's weight in gold to be rid of it. And the rumor found eager ears. His name is Beowulf, Prince of the Geats. And he arrived not with a fleet, but with a single ship, a predatory slash of oak and tar that cut through the dawn fog like a dagger. We saw them from the cliffs, my brother and I, as we scavenged for driftwood. They were not like other men. They did not stumble onto the shore, weary from the sea. They disembarked with a chilling, synchronized purpose, their mail coats shimmering like the scales of some sea creature, their eyes hard as the flint they sparked their fires with. And at their head, Beowulf. He is young. Younger than the songs will likely ever say. His face is unlined, but his eyes are old. They hold the cold, flat gray of the winter sea. He carries himself with the absolute certainty of a man who has never known doubt, yet as he looked upon the path to Heorot, I saw something flicker in that granite gaze. Not fear. It was hunger. A deep, gnawing need for something that glory alone cannot sate. He seeks a meaning, I think. A reason for the strength that the gods, or some darker fate, have woven into his bones. He has come to kill a monster, yes. But I wonder if he has come to find one, too. The court of Hrothgar was a tomb dressed as a feast. The mead flowed, the boar was roasted, but the laughter was too loud, too brittle. Hrothgar, on his high seat, was a monument to eroded power. His queen, Wealhtheow, moved with a serene grace that did not reach her eyes. They were constantly darting towards the great doors, waiting for the night to fall. Beowulf stood before the king, his Geats a solid, silent wall at his back. He spoke his vow, his voice not a boast, but a simple, chilling statement of fact. I have come to cleanse this hall, Lord Hrothgar. I will not kill Grendel with a sword. He knows no fear of blades. I will meet him with my hands. Let our strength, his and mine, decide whom fate wishes to keep. A ripple went through the hall. Some saw arrogance. I saw a terrifying logic. But from the shadows of the pillars, another man watched. Unferth, the king's advisor, his tongue sharp with envy and his heart a nest of vipers. Later, when the cups were heavy, he rose, his smile a thin, cruel line. The great Beowulf, he slurred. We have heard tales of you. Of a swimming contest in the sea, a 7-day race against the boy, Brika. They say you lost. They say the sea beasts and the cold waves were too much for you, that you washed ashore, defeated, on some insignificant spit of land. A silence fell, thick and heavy. Beowulf did not flinch. He turned that calm, sea-gray gaze upon Unferth, and when he spoke, his words were measured, each one a stone dropped into a still pool. You are drunk, Unferth, and your memory is as clouded as your wit. What you call a loss, I call a victory. Brika and I were boys, testing our mettle. For 5 days and nights, we swam, side by side, through a storm sent by the gods themselves. It was not a contest, but a brotherhood. And when the northern gale tore us apart, it was not a beast that I fought, but the sea itself. I slew 9 Nicors, sea demons, that dragged me into the deep, with my bare hands. The tides carried me to the land of the Finns. I walked ashore. I did not wash up. He let the words hang in the air, a testament more powerful than any boast. The shame was Unferth's now, a red flush creeping up his neck. Beowulf had not just defended himself, he had revealed a past etched in struggle and survival far beyond the comprehension of a hull-bound courtier. He had drawn a line between the man who talks of deeds and the man who lives them. Now, as I speak, the sun is a dying ember on the horizon. The Geats, led by Beowulf, are preparing Heorot. They are barring the door from the inside, stacking benches, not to keep the creature out, but to ensure it cannot escape. Beowulf has removed his mail. His arms and shoulders are bare, the muscle coiled like great ropes. He is waiting. The fire is banked. The hall is dark, save for a single shaft of moonlight piercing the high windows. The wind has fallen silent. The only sound is the ragged breath of every man waiting in the gloom. The kingdom holds its breath. The shadow is coming. And the prince from across the sea is waiting to greet it, not with a hero's cry, but with the terrible, silent embrace of his own 2 hands. The story is beginning. And I am here to tell it. The silence in Heorot was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating wool pressed into the ears and lungs of every man. It was a silence that had not been earned by peace, but stolen from the mouth of impending chaos. The great fire in the center hearth was a bed of sullen, glowing coals, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed like tormented spirits on the walls. The air was cold, tasting of smoke, spilled mead, and the sharp, animal scent of fear. Beowulf stood in the center of the hall, a pillar of stillness in the trembling dark. His Geats were positioned around him, a loose circle of grim resolve, their hands white-knuckled on the hafts of their spears. They were brave men, hardened by sea and sword, but the enemy they faced tonight was one against which their steel might be useless. They had trusted their lives to the strength of their prince, to the promise in his calm, gray eyes. Now, in the absolute quiet, that trust was a fragile thing. The narrator's voice, when it came again, was a low, tense whisper, as if afraid to break the spell of the waiting night. I was not in the hall. No living soul, save for the Geats, witnessed what began there. But the walls of Heorot have ears of wood and stone, and the wind carries secrets from the high windows. I have pieced this together from the choked whispers of the survivors, from the things Beowulf himself would only hint at in the years to come. This is the truth of that night, It began not with a sound, but with a feeling. A deep, subsonic vibration that started in the soles of the feet and climbed up into the teeth. It was the tremor of something massive and heavy moving across the frozen earth outside, a rhythm that was profoundly, horribly wrong. Thump, drag. Thump, drag, it was the gate of something broken and malformed, yet possessed of an impossible power. Then came the smell. It washed into the hall ahead of the creature itself, a foul, wetland stench of stagnant water, decaying flesh, and old, clotted blood. Men gagged, their eyes watering, their courage faltering at this primal assault. The Geats tightened their circle, their breath pluming in the suddenly frigid air. At the great, iron-banded doors, there was a pause. A moment of utter stillness, as if the presence outside was listening, savoring the terror within. Then, a scrape of something hard and sharp against the oak. A testing. A mockery. With a roar that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night, Grendel struck. The doors did not simply break, they exploded inward. Shattered planks and twisted iron hinges flew through the hall like deadly splinters. Framed in the moonlit doorway was a shape that defied reason. It was a man, but writ on a colossal, nightmare scale. Its skin was a pale, mottled gray, like a corpse pulled from a bog. It had no neck to speak of, its low, brutish head seemed to sprout directly from its monstrous shoulders, and its eyes burned with a sickly, greenish luminescence, the fire of pure, undiluted hatred. It was its arms that struck the most terror. They were grotesquely long, ending in hands equipped with claws like blackened iron talons, which scraped grooves into the stone floor as it lurched into the hall. The Geats, to their eternal credit, did not break. They roared their own battle cries, a desperate human sound against the monster's primordial scream, and surged forward. Spears, honed to a razor's edge, thrust at the creature's torso. The narrator's voice quickened, laced with the horror of the moment. Steel rang, but it did not bite. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountainside. The points of their spears skittered off its hide, sparking faintly, failing to even draw blood. Grendel swatted them aside. It was not a fight, it was a harvest. One massive, taloned hand swept out and closed around a warrior named Hansio. The man had time for one truncated shriek before he was torn in two, his body cast in separate, bloody arcs across the hall. Viscera painted the walls, *. The hall became a slaughterhouse. The monster moved with a speed that belied its size, a blur of pale death in the gloom. Shields of linden wood were splintered like kindling. Bones cracked like dry twigs. The air grew thick with the coppery stench of blood and the cacophony of screams and the wet, tearing sounds of dismemberment. And through it all, Beowulf watched. He had not moved from his spot. He stood, a statue of coiled potential, his eyes tracking the monster's every move. He was learning. He saw the way it favored its right side, the slight hesitation in its left leg. He saw the mindless rage in its eyes, the lack of strategy. This was not a warrior. It was a force of nature, a storm of teeth and claws. And you do not reason with a storm. You must survive it. As Grendel finished disemboweling another Geat, its maw dripping gore, its burning eyes fell upon the one man who had not fled, who had not screamed. The one man who stood in silent, defiant challenge. With a guttural roar of triumph, the monster lunged for Beowulf. This was the moment. The silence of the waiting was gone, replaced by the explosive violence of the clash. Beowulf did not try to strike a blow. As Grendel's talons swept down to seize him, he moved inside the arc of the attack. His own hands, strong enough to strangle sea demons, shot out and locked around Grendel's massive forearm. A shockwave of sheer, physical force seemed to ripple out from the point of contact. The remaining Geats, clutching their wounds, stared in awe and terror. It was a contest of titans. Beowulf's muscles corded, his feet digging into the blood-slick stone, grinding for purchase. Grendel, for the first time, let out a sound that was not of rage, but of surprise. A pained, infuriated shriek. This puny man-thing was not breaking. It was holding him. The sound was not human, the narrator whispered, his voice hushed with remembered awe. It was the shriek of a bear caught in a trap, the groan of ancient ice shearing from a glacier. Beowulf's face was a mask of utter concentration, every fiber of his being, every ounce of his soul, focused on the single task of bending the monster's arm backward, *. Grendel thrashed, his free hand clawing at Beowulf's back, but the Geat prince twisted, using the monster's own momentum against it, keeping the deadly talons just out of reach. The leather of his tunic tore, and deep, bleeding gouges were opened in his flesh, but he did not relent. He began to bend the arm back, further, past the point of any natural joint. The sinews in the monster's shoulder began to pop, one by one, like overtuned harp strings. The screech that tore from Grendel's throat was a thing of pure, undiluted agony. He stumbled backward, trying to retreat, to flee back into the welcoming darkness from whence he came. But Beowulf held fast, a predator now himself, his grip unbreakable. With a final, titanic heave, there came a wet, sickening crack, followed by a tearing of muscle and tendon. Beowulf, with a roar that echoed the monster's own, ripped Grendel's entire arm and shoulder from its socket. The limb came away in his hands, a grotesque, bloody trophy. Grendel staggered, a fountain of black, foul-smelling blood gushing from the ruin of his shoulder. He let out one last, baleful moan of despair and pain, and fled, stumbling, out the shattered doorway and into the night, leaving a trail of his own vitals behind him. Silence descended once more, broken only by the ragged panting of Beowulf and the soft, pained moans of the wounded. The coals in the hearth seemed to glow a little brighter. The prince stood drenched in blood, both his and the monster's, the colossal arm still clutched in his hand. He had done it. He had kept his vow. The Geats, those who could, rose to their feet. A cheer began, weak at first, then growing, a wave of relief and triumph that sought to scour the horror from the hall. They had survived. The monster was broken. But as they rushed to their prince, to lift him onto their shoulders, they saw his face. He was not celebrating. He was staring at the doorway through which the maimed Grendel had fled, his expression not of victory, but of grim foreboding. The arm in his hand was still twitching. The victory was complete. The curse was lifted. The shadow was banished. But as the first rays of the dawn touched the splintered doors of Heorot, illuminating the carnage within, Beowulf knew, in the deep, silent places of his soul, what the narrator and the whole kingdom would soon learn. This was not an end. It was a beginning. A deeper, colder, and far more ancient darkness had just been awakened. And it was a darkness that would not be defeated by strength of arms alone. The celebration was a frantic, desperate thing. It had the sound of joy, but the taste of ashes. For 30 nights, Heorot had been a tomb. On this dawn, it became a shrine to a savior, a charnel house, and a brewing ground for a new terror, all at once. The arm. They nailed it to the gable above the main door, a stark, brutal testament. It was a limb of nightmare, gray and slick, the talons still seeming to curl as if eager for flesh. The people of the village gathered, pointing and whispering, their faces a mixture of awe and revulsion. They brought gifts, smoked meats, rough-hewn jewelry, their gratitude as raw and unrefined as the land itself. King Hrothgar, his eyes clear for the first time in a year, wept openly. He proclaimed Beowulf his son in all but blood, and promised him treasures beyond counting. The shadow is lifted, the old king boomed, his voice finding a ghost of its former power. The heart of the Danes beat strong again. But the narrator's voice, when it returned, was heavy with irony. The heart beat, yes. But it beat with a fever. We were drunk on victory, on mead, on the simple, profound relief of being alive. We saw the monster's limb and believed the monster dead. We did not understand the nature of the curse. It was not a single beast, but a lineage. A bloodline of shadow. And we had just spilled its blood, Beowulf accepted the accolades with a quiet grace that bordered on detachment. The wounds on his back, though cleaned and bound, were deep. But the deeper wound was to his spirit. As the feasting wore on, he sat beside Hrothgar, his gaze distant. He had proven his strength. He had achieved the glory he sailed for. So why did the mead taste so bitter? Why did the sight of that nailed-up arm feel less like a trophy and more like a challenge, thrown down at the feet of something infinitely older and more patient. I served at the feast that night, the narrator said, his tone intimate, confessional. I poured the prince's mead. I saw the way his eyes kept drifting from the firelight to the dark expanse of the window. He was not listening to the songs they were already composing in his name. He was listening to the night. And the night was listening back, It did not wait long to answer. The attack came not on Heorot, but on the heart of the king himself. In the deepest hour of the night, when the revelry had finally sunk into a stuporous sleep, a different kind of shadow entered the hall. It did not break the doors. It flowed under them, a whisper of mist and malice. It was Grendel's mother. She took as cheer, Hrothgar's most beloved friend, his counselor and brother-in-arms. He was not butchered in his bed like the others. He was taken. Silently, efficiently, with a terrifying purpose. All that was left was his head, placed with deliberate, mocking care upon the high seat of Hrothgar, his eyes wide with a frozen, final understanding. The scream that tore from Hrothgar's throat when he found it at first light was a sound of such pure, unadulterated grief that it silenced the very birds outside. He collapsed into Beowulf's arms, an old man once more, broken beyond repair. The other, Hrothgar sobbed, his voice a ragged tear. The she-wolf of the sea. I thought it an old wives' tale. She has taken him, to her lair. The kingdom, so recently jubilant, plunged into a despair deeper than before. This was not mindless slaughter. This was vengeance. It was personal. And it was far, far more intelligent. Hrothgar, his face a mask of tears and rage, led Beowulf and a company of men to the edge of the mere. It was a place of ancient dread, a lake shrouded in perpetual, sickly mist. The water was black and stagnant, its surface broken by the gnarled, bone-white roots of trees that seemed to clutch at the sky. Animal skeletons littered the shore, and the air hummed with the drone of fat, black flies. The very water was poison. A stag, pursued by hounds, would rather turn and be torn apart than plunge into its accursed depths. This was no mere swamp, the narrator whispered, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. This was a threshold. A place where the world of men grew thin, and something older, something that remembered the first cold and the first blood, seeped through. Without a word, Beowulf began to arm himself. This time, he took a sword, Hrunting, a legendary, wave-patterned blade lent to him by the chastened Unferth, who now looked upon the Geat with something like terrified worship. As Beowulf strapped on his mail coat, the narrator saw the look in his eyes again. Not hunger this time. Not even grim determination. It was a kind of resignation. An acceptance of a descent into a darkness from which he might not return. He turned to Hrothgar and his own men. "Wait for me," he said, his voice flat and final. "If I do not return, remember the hall. Keep the fires lit." Then, without a backward glance, he dove into the black, foul water. The world vanished. The light died. The cold was not the cold of winter, but the deep, penetrating chill of the grave. He sank for what felt like an age, through tangled forests of slimy weed and past the staring, empty sockets of long-drowned creatures. And then, a light. Not from above, but from below. A sickly, phosphorescent glow. He broke not into water, but into an air-filled cavern, a pocket of nightmare at the bottom of the mere. The lair. The narrator's voice became a dreamlike chant, describing a place outside of time. It was a hall, but not built by hands of men. The ribs of ancient, Leviathan skeletons formed its arches. The floor was a mosaic of human and animal bones, polished smooth by the ceaseless, subtle currents. The light came from fungi that pulsed with a slow, green rhythm, and from piles of treasure, arm rings, corroded helmets, gem-studded cups, plundered from 1,000 forgotten graves. This was the horde of the forgotten, the kingdom of the exile. And she was waiting for him, She rose from the gloom. Grendel's mother. She was not a larger version of her son. She was something else entirely. Her form was fluid, shifting between a hag of impossible age and a creature of sleek, aquatic horror. Her eyes held the same hate, but it was a cold, calculating hate, honed by centuries of loss. She was not a beast. She was a queen in her own desolate realm. The fight was not a test of strength, but a desperate, underwater ballet of death. Beowulf swung fronting with all his might. The blade, famed for never failing a hero, rang on her hide and did not bite. It glanced off, the ancient magic in her skin turning the steel aside. She shrieked, a sound that was like the tearing of a world, and lunged. Her claws, sharper and more cunning than her son's, found their mark. They tangled in his mail, and she dragged him down, into a side chamber, pressing him against a wall, pulling a short, brutal dagger, from a pile of treasure. She raised it, her eyes blazing with triumphant fury, to plunge it into his throat. This was the end. The strength in his hands, the glory of his name, meant nothing here. He was pinned, his sword useless. He was going to die in this sunless hall, another piece of bone in her collection. But fate, or something older, had a different design. His eyes, scanning the hellish chamber for any hope, any weapon, fell upon a sight that made his heart stop. Hanging on the wall was a sword. But no sword made by men. It was colossal, a giant's weapon, its hilt intricately worked with runes of a forgotten language, its blade wider than a man's hand. It glowed with a pure, clean, golden light, a stark contrast to the sickly green of the lair. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he shoved her back, just enough to break her grip. He lunged for the wall, his fingers closing around the hilt of the ancient sword. It came away as if it had been waiting for him. As Grendel's mother charged again, her seeks held high, Beowulf turned and brought the giant's blade around in a single, cleaving arc. It did not ring. It sang. The edge passed through her neck without resistance. There was no spray of blood, only a burst of that same, intense light. Her shriek was cut short. She fell, and as she did, her form seemed to dissolve, melting away into the dark water like mist under a morning sun. The light from the sword illuminated the chamber, burning away the shadows. It fell upon the body of Grendel, lying in a corner where his mother had laid him to rest. In a final act of vengeance, Beowulf strode over and, with a single blow, severed the monster's head from its body. But the victory was short-lived. The blood of the two creatures, so ancient and so potent, was a corrosive acid. As it clouded the water, the giant's sword, its purpose fulfilled, began to melt. The blade dissolved, the runes fading, until all that was left in Beowulf's hand was the ornate, golden hilt. He stood alone in the silent, light-faded lair, the hilt in one hand, Grendel's monstrous head in the other. The adrenaline faded, and the cold of the mere seeped back into his bones. He had won. He had survived. He had avenged Aeschyr and slain a terror far greater than her son. But as he began his long, slow ascent back to the world of men, he carried with him more than a grisly trophy. He carried the weight of the darkness he had witnessed. He carried the knowledge that glory is fleeting, and that the oldest shadows are not banished by light, but merely waiting for it to gutter and die. He had gone into the mirror a hero. He was returning as something else. Something haunted. Something that had looked into the abyss, and seen a part of himself staring back. The return was not a triumph, it was a resurrection. When Beowulf broke the surface of the mirror, the grisly head of Grendel held aloft in one fist, the golden hilt of the giant's sword clutched in the other. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had fought his way out of the underworld. His mail was rent, his body was crisscrossed with welts and the deep, burning scratches from her claws, and his eyes held the absolute blackness of the abyssal depths. The cheering of the men on the shore died in their throats as they waded in to pull him to land. They were not greeting a hero, they were retrieving a relic from a grave. Hrothgar wept again, this time clutching the golden hilt like a holy talisman, the proof of a salvation he could scarcely believe. Aeschyr was avenged. The line of the monster was extinguished. The kingdom was safe. We believed it, then, the narrator's voice intoned, its earlier fire banked to a somber, weary wisdom. We believed the story was over. We feasted for 7 days and 7 nights. Heorot was rebuilt, its new doors thicker, its iron bands heavier, as if we could barricade ourselves against the very memory of the dark. Beowulf was given more gold and treasure than a man could spend in 3 lifetimes. He was a brother to kings, a legend in his own time. And when he and his Geats sailed for home, their ship rode low in the water, weighted down with glory. The seasons turned. The years piled upon one another like autumn leaves. In Geatland, Beowulf's name was a song on every tongue. He served his king, Hygelac, with a fierce loyalty, his fame a shield for his people. When Hygelac fell in a doomed raid, and his son soon after, the crown, heavy and inevitable, was placed upon Beowulf's head. He did not seek it, the narrator said softly. Not like he sought the glory in his youth. The kingship was a duty, a burden he accepted because there was no one else strong enough to bear it. And so, the warrior became a ruler. The man who lived by his hands now had to learn to rule with his head and his heart. The tone of the narration shifted. The frantic pace of monster fights and desperate quests gave way to the slow, grinding rhythm of governance. Beowulf, king of the Geats, was a good king. Wise, fair, strong. He kept the peace for 50 winters. He settled disputes from his high seat, a great, carved throne that he seemed to fill not with his body, but with the weight of his reputation. His people prospered. They felt safe. But the narrator saw what others missed. Asterisk the boy who had sailed to Daneland seeking meaning in the heat of battle was gone. In his place was a man haunted by the cold of the mere. He never spoke of it, not truly. But sometimes, in the deep of night, when the wind howled around the royal hall with a particular mournful sound, I would see him standing at a window, staring out into the dark. He was not watching for enemies. He was listening. Always listening, asterisk. The scars on his back, long since faded to silver webs, were nothing compared to the scar on his soul. He had looked into the heart of the primordial shadow, the mother of monsters, and he had understood something fundamental, that the darkness was not an invasion. It was a part of the world. It was the balance. And his strength, the very thing that defined him, was merely a temporary bulwark against it. He grew isolated. He took no queen. He sired no heir. The intimate human dramas of love, of legacy, of passing a name to a son, these were not for him. His legacy was his reign, a long, unbroken summer of peace bought with the knowledge of winter. His companions, the brave Geats who had stood with him in Heorot and mourned their brothers, grew old and died, one by one. Their sons and grandsons now stood in his hall, their faces full of reverence for the legend, but they did not know the man. They did not know the price of the peace they enjoyed. He became a statue of himself, the narrator murmured, a note of pity in his voice. Asterisk a living memorial to his own past deeds. The songs they sang of Grendel and his mother were epic and grand. They did not sing of the silence that followed, of the weight of the crown, of the king who walked the halls alone, the echo of his own footsteps his only company, asterisk. He tried to teach the young ones, to impart the hard-won lessons. That a king's duty is not to glory, but to his people. That true strength lies not in breaking a monster's arm, but in holding a kingdom together. That the most dangerous enemies are not those who shatter doors in the night, but those that fester in the hearts of men, greed, envy, ambition. But they listened with polite, distant eyes. They saw an old man, his famous strength leaching away with the years, his hair and beard gone the color of ash. They could not see the young prince who had strangled sea demons. They could only see a king, and kings, to the young, are merely obstacles to their own glory. 50 years. A lifetime of peace. A monument to his rule. But shadows, once acknowledged, do not disappear. They merely find new shapes. They retreat, they gather strength, they wait for the light to wane. And as Beowulf's strength waned, as the fire in his eyes dimmed to embers, the shadow in the heart of his kingdom began to stir. It was not a shadow of ancient curse or primordial hatred. It was a shadow born of human failing. A shadow of greed. And it slept on a bed of gold, deep within a stone-barrowed hill, guarded by a wrath that was as old as the hills themselves. The peace of 50 years was a fragile vessel. And it was about to be shattered by the sound of a single, clumsy, desperate theft. The final act of Beowulf's saga was waiting in the dark, coiled and patient, breathing fire. The peace of 50 years was broken not by a war horn, but by the furtive scrape of a spade in the dark. The narrator's voice, which had been a low, ruminative stream, now sharpened, taking on the hard, flinty edge of impending doom. Asterisk it was a slave, a man driven by a fear of his master's whip more than any greed for gold. Fleeing a beating, he stumbled upon an ancient, overgrown burial mound, a forgotten tomb of a forgotten warrior race. Seeking shelter, he found a way in, a narrow passage leading down into the earth and the deep, resonant silence of ages. And there, in the stagnant dark, he saw it. A sea of gold, asterisk. The treasure was beyond comprehension. Cups, bowls, arm rings, swords with jeweled hilts, all piled in a magnificent, chaotic heap, glowing with a soft, innate light in the absolute blackness. It was the hoard of the Wagemundings, a tribe lost to time. And in his terror and his awe, the slave saw not a cursed legacy, but his salvation. He snatched a single, heavy, gem-encrusted cup, stuffed it into his tunic, and fled, believing he had stolen a future. He had, instead, awakened the past. He did not see the guardian, the narrator whispered, the words slithering through the hall. Asterisk he did not feel the shift in the air, the intake of a breath that had not been drawn in 300 years. He did not see the great, scaled flank, the color of tarnished copper, or the lid of one sulphurous eye, like a banked furnace, cracking open. The dragon had slept, its dreams woven from the whispers of the gold it protected, a spell of possession as old as greed itself. And the spell was broken, asterisk. The theft was discovered by the beast the moment the slave breached the sunlight. A harmony of its hoard had been disrupted, a single note gone silent in the symphony of its possession. Its rage was instantaneous, absolute, and apocalyptic. It did not hunt for the thief. It punished the kingdom. That night, a firestorm fell upon the Geats. The dragon, a creature of such immense size that its wings blotted out the stars, swept down from the hills. Its breath was not merely flame, but a liquid, clinging napalm that melted stone and boiled flesh in its mail. It did not target the royal hall. It burned the outlying farms, the villages, the granaries. It turned the fruits of Beowulf's 50-year peace to ash and cinder. The earth itself was scorched black, and the air reeked of sulfur and cooked meat. This was not the mindless rage of Grendel, the narrator said, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. Asterisk this was a calculated, intelligent wrath. It was teaching us a lesson. That every comfort, every life, every thread in the tapestry of our peace, was borrowed. And the debt was now due, asterisk. In his hall, the old king listened to the reports, his face a mask of granite grief. He saw the terror in the eyes of his young thanes. They had grown soft on his peace, their swords were polished for ceremony, not for fighting creatures of legend. I will go, Beowulf said, his voice quiet, yet it filled the silent hall. This is my fate. It has always been my fate. He was an old man. His great strength, the legacy of his youth, was a memory his body could no longer fully recall. But the will inside that body was iron. He ordered a shield of iron to be forged, for wood would be kindling against the dragon's breath. He chose his companions, not an army, but a small band of his bravest, including a young kinsman named Wiglaf, whose eyes held not the distant reverence of the others, but a fierce, unwavering loyalty. The narrator's tone became elegiac, painting the march to the barrow as a funeral procession. Asterisk we walked behind him, a handful of men trailing a king who was walking into his own sunset. He was silent, his gaze fixed on the smoke-stained horizon. He was not the young prince seeking glory, nor the victorious hero returning from the mere. He was a king, going to settle his final debt. He was going to give his life for the people he had protected for 50 years. And he knew it, asterisk. They found the barrow, the entrance a dark, steaming maw. The air trembled with heat. Beowulf turned to his men, his voice firm. This is not your fight. Stay here, behind the shield wall. Let me, alone, test my strength against this worm. It is a king's duty. Then, the old king drew his sword, nagling, a fine and ancient blade, and stood before the entrance. He did not wait. He threw back his head and shouted his own name, a challenge that echoed not with the brashness of youth, but with the solemn, final authority of a sovereign defending his land. Beowulf. The earth shook. With a roar that split the sky, the dragon emerged. The fight was not a battle, it was a cataclysm. Beowulf, shielded by iron, met the first blast of fire head-on. The heat was infernal, scorching the grass for 100 paces. He charged through the flames, nagling flashing in the hellish light, and struck the beast's scaled hide. The sword rang true, but it did not bite deep. The ancient blade glanced off the enchanted scales. Beowulf struck again and again, each blow weaker than the last, his old arms tiring. The dragon, enraged, coiled and struck, its fangs sinking into Beowulf's neck. A gasp of mortal agony escaped the king's lips. Blood, shockingly bright, welled from the wound, soaking his shoulder and chest. We watched, frozen in terror, the narrator cried, the memory raw. Our king was dying before our eyes. The legend was falling. And one heart among us could not bear it, Wiglaf. The young thane's heart shattered at the sight. He remembered the king's kindness, his wisdom, the weight of the peace he had given them. He remembered his oath. With a cry that was both a sob and a war shout, he broke from the shield wall, his own sword in hand. For our king, he screamed, and charged into the furnace. His bravery broke the dragon's concentration. As it turned its head to bathe this new fool in flame, Beowulf, with the last of his ebbing strength, drew a dagger, a short, sharp seeks from his belt. As Wiglaf stabbed the beast from below, driving his sword into its softer underbelly, Beowulf plunged the dagger deep into the dragon's throat. A gout of blood, black and boiling, erupted from the wound. The dragon shuddered, its fire dying in its chest, and collapsed, its great weight shaking the earth. It was dead. But the victory was ashes. Beowulf sank to his knees, the life pouring from him. Wiglaf caught him, cradling the old king's head. The barrow was open. The treasure, vast and gleaming, was theirs. Beowulf looked at it, then at Wiglaf, his vision fading. "You," he whispered, blood on his lips. "You are the last of our line. Take the treasure. Give it to the people. It is cursed with pride, let it buy them food, safety, a future. Let my barrow be built high on the headland, a beacon for sailors, so they will know, a king once ruled here." His head fell back. The sea-gray eyes, which had seen such wonders and such horrors, stared into a sky now clearing of smoke. The king was dead. The narrator fell silent. The only sound was the memory of the wind and the echo of a fallen hero's last breath. The saga was over. The fire had gone out. And the long, cold night of a kingdom without its protector was beginning. The wind off the sea has a new sound now. It is a lament. It carries the scent of cold stone and fresh-turned earth, and on certain nights, when the fog rolls in thick from the whale road, it carries the ghost of smoke. They built his barrow high on the headland, as he asked. A great mound of earth and stone, visible for a day's sail in any direction. It is a silent, brooding presence, a monument not just to a man, but to an age. They laid him within its heart, and with him, the dragon's hoard. Not as an honor, but as a burial. They sealed the curse of greed and pride back into the earth, under the weight of a king's sacrifice. What use is gold to a people who have lost their shield? Wiglaf, his face aged a decade in a single afternoon, oversaw it all. He stood before the few remaining thanes, their courage shamed, their spirits broken. The young man who had charged the dragon was gone, replaced by a grim, weary leader. He was a good king, Wiglaf told them, his voice hollow with grief and prophecy. He gave us 50 winters of peace. And we, who benefited from that peace, failed him in his last moment. Now, the storm gathers. Without his strength to ward them off, the Swede folk will hear of his fall. The Franks and the Frisians will remember old grudges. Our time of safety is over. We traded it for our cowardice at the barrow door. The narrator's voice was soft now, stripped of its earlier cinematic grandeur, replaced by the simple, stark tone of a witness who has seen the wheel of fate turn its final, crushing rotation. I am an old man myself now. I saw the prince arrive in his ship, a blade of promise cutting through the dawn. I saw the king walk to his doom, a slow, solemn shadow against a burning sky. And I have lived to see the world grow dimmer in his absence. The songs are still sung, of course. In the new halls, they sing of Beowulf and Grendel, of the mighty grip and the giant's sword. They make the deeds grander, the monsters more terrible, the hero more a god than a man, but they do not sing of the quiet moments. They do not sing of the weight in his eyes when he returned from the mere. They do not sing of the lonely king staring into the long night, bearing the burden of a peace that made his people soft, knowing it would be the death of them all. They have made him a legend, and in doing so, they have lost the man. And it is the man we needed, The Geatish nation did not fall in a day. It crumbled, like a sea cliff eroded by a relentless tide. Just as Wiglaf foretold, the news of Beowulf's death was a signal fire to their enemies. War came, not with a single great beast, but with the countless, mundane horrors of steel and fire and slavery. The kingdom he had built with his strength and wisdom was partitioned, plundered, and forgotten. The great hall where he once ruled fell silent, its timbers rotting, its hearth cold forever. This is the way of the world, the narrator mused, his gaze turned inward. The shadows always return. They are the fear in the dark, the envy in a rival's heart, the greed that sleeps on a pile of gold. They are the chaos that waits at the edges of every firelit circle. Beowulf held them back for a lifetime, a monumental feat, but he was only a man. And men fall, asterisk. He paused, and in the silence, a single, resilient note of hope emerged, fragile but undeniable. But so do heroes rise. Asterisk his barrow still stands. Sailors use it as a marker, a sign that they are not lost in the vast grey wilderness of the sea. They point to it and say, "There lies Beowulf." They do not know the whole story. They do not know the cost. But they know the name. And the name carries the echo of the deed. It carries the idea that one man, flawed and mortal, can stand against the tide of shadow, even if only for a while. That the struggle itself has meaning, asterisk. Asterisk his saga is both legend and warning. A legend of immense courage. A warning that the victory is never final, the peace is never permanent. The cost of glory is everything. But it is a cost that must sometimes be paid, so that others may have a song to sing, a story to tell, a shore to sail for, asterisk. The storyteller's voice faded, merging with the sigh of the wind around the ancient barrow. Asterisk the fire of the dragon is ash. The light in the hero's eyes is gone. But the story remains. And as long as there are voices to speak it, and hearts to hear it, the shadow does not have the final word. It is not a happy ending. But it is an echo of hope. And in this dark, old world, that is sometimes enough, asterisk. If the saga of Beowulf has stirred your spirit, if you felt the chill of Grendel's mere or the heat of the dragon's fire, then the Scops, the storytellers, of this age have a request for you. Your voice is now part of this story. Subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a tale from the ancient north. Leave a like upon the shield wall of this video, a signal to the algorithm beast that this story deserves to be heard. And most importantly, carve your runes in the comments below. Tell us, what shadow would you have faced? Which king would you have served? Was Beowulf's sacrifice worth the peace it bought? Your thoughts, your theories, your own stories, they are the mead that fuels our hull. They ensure that these legends do not fade into silence, but are passed down, remembered, and lived anew. Until the next tale, fellow listeners. May your own sagas be epic.